BARK Radio.
What's good, everybody? It's Robo from All Bark back with another video, and today I'm bringing you my college football Week 2 picks. The 2025 season is finally underway. We've already had a couple great games under our belt and a couple good ones scheduled for this week. Before I get into the picks, I want to mention I have an NFL picks video coming out later this week, so stay tuned for that. But with that said, let's go ahead and recap the Week 0 results for the channel. Here's a recap of how Week 1 went for the picks. A really nice Saturday carried us to a strong record against the spread and a dominant week picking winners. There were a couple late backdoors that kept us from an even better week, but no complaints honestly. Week 2 is where the books adjust quite a bit, so we'll hope to find some value and make the right reads to continue that success. It's a shorter week than last in terms of number of spreads available, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with Friday night. We've only got 2 spreads for Friday night to look at, but this one could be a banger. James Madison traveling to Louisville after a really strong Week 1 performance from Alonzo Barnett. Before I took JMU to cover last week, I was not sure he was playing, but he's back healthy and put on a show. It sounds like he's a starter, and Sluka will get some run here and there behind him, but Barnett is without a question one of the top quarterbacks in the entire group of 5. Louisville is a very solid team though and will be a much tougher challenge, but I really believe JMU can compete in this game and keep it close. I feel pretty comfortable with that running game and quarterback play, thinking they'll score a few times against this Cards defense. Louisville just has way too much firepower offensively on their own for this to be an upset to me though. So I've got Louisville taking the win here, 35-24. It's officially Malik Washington's season at Maryland, and as a result, the Terps looked much better than I expected in Week 1. I mentioned in my Big Ten preview, I really am high on Washington and hope they give him a shot early on. And I think we saw that ceiling raising on display with that performance he had against FAU. And honestly, I'm very low on Northern Illinois this season. Last week proved that even further for me. I really view this game as potentially an easier opponent for the Terps than last week, and I've got Maryland all day in this game with another strong offensive day, 37-13. Penn State has another warm-up game this week hosting Florida International. This is just an incredible team, honestly, just cruising through the non-conference as safe as possible. I think they definitely should have covered last week, but a few field goals and then a last-second Nevada touchdown ruined that for the picks. FIU is not a very competitive team in the group of 5 to me, but I had them higher than Nevada to begin the year, and they didn't really disappoint in Week 1, blowing the doors off of Bethune-Cookman. Keon Jenkins has been there for a while, and Keyshawn Owens is a pretty strong RB1. I think they could get on the board in this game with a couple field goals, or maybe score a touchdown with that dual threat ability in their backfield. And like I said, Penn State's going to sit guys pretty early with the game in hand, and I think this spread's high enough for FIU to be able to cover it. So I'm going to roll with a 45-9 final score in Happy Valley. Arch Manning's first start of the season was pretty much a disaster, missing throws left and right and really struggling for the majority of that game against Ohio State, where I think many people believe an average game for him could have resulted in a win for them. This week he gets a chance to get more comfortable and bounce back though with a home matchup against a San Jose State team that couldn't stop Central Michigan on the ground. Texas should absolutely steamroll this game in the trenches. And my opinion on Central Michigan has not changed much from that game. I think it's more indicative of San Jose State's flaws. I don't see how they move the ball on this Texas front at all, and the Longhorns should be able to run all game long to make things easier for Arch to get in a groove. I think this one ends in a pretty lopsided final, 48-10. Illinois at Duke should be one of the best games of the week, and I really don't know which way to go on this one. Illinois is a very good team and has really strong offensive line play and an experienced quarterback, but Duke should be really competitive in the trenches and has an elite secondary that can make things a bit tougher on Altmaier on the road. They got a much-needed game under their belt for all the newcomers to learn and grow together on the offense, and despite a slower first half, I think they have a real shot here the way they played finishing that game against Elon. Again, Altmaier is a very solid quarterback, but he simply was not too impressive in the big games last season, and this could qualify as one of those games, again, going on the road against a near top 25 team. I think it comes down to his effectiveness in this game. If Duke can defend well and protect Mensa in their pocket from Gabe Akis off the edge, I see this going down to the wire. I'm going to take the upset with the Blue Devils at home by 3, 27-24. Iowa State-Iowa is a yearly elite football game and almost always low scoring. This year potentially could look a bit different though, and I think Iowa State is just the better team this season. Last week was an incredible display against one of the better teams in the FCS. Rocco Beck looks completely in rhythm with his new guys, and the defense stepped up both against Kansas State and last week. The Hawkeye defense is not as strong as usual this season, and last week's performance did not change that opinion for me. I didn't really expect Albany to score much at all, and although the run game was completely dominant, the Cyclones have a much higher level front seven to oppose that, and we saw absolutely nothing from the Iowa passing attack that looked improved, although I do still think Gradowski will eventually be an upgrade from their past. This is a rivalry game, so you really never know, but I feel pretty comfortable favoring the Cyclones this week. I'm taking Iowa State 27-20. We'll follow that game up with another noon banger, Baylor at SMU. Baylor's defense really struggled week 1 against Auburn. I really love Sawyer Robertson in that offense and think they can score on pretty much anyone, but SMU at home is a big challenge. This team is very legit. Kevin Jennings brings a more trustworthy arm than Jackson Arnold did while having a similar dual threat profile that tore Baylor apart. And they've got a pretty solid secondary that could force a few stops on Baylor's offense. I think this game could go either way depending on turnovers and how Baylor responds defensively, especially considering SMU doesn't have near the same level of weapons as Auburn. But I feel like SMU's offense should still be able to take advantage of Baylor's secondary throughout this game and can win a shootout if that's what it becomes. So I'll ride with the Ponies close, 37-31. Indiana started a little slow week one, not looking quite as sharp offensively as I had hoped, but I still think this team is really talented, and Fernando Mendoza will settle in pretty quickly. I did like Old Dominion going into that game too. I just wasn't super impressed with the Hoosier offense as much as I was hoping for, which makes me think we can definitely see Kennesaw State holding this game within a 5-touchdown spread. As I mentioned last week, Kennesaw is an improved team from a year ago. Nothing crazy, but I like the skill positions better this year, and the defense gives me some hope for them in the Conference USA. If Indiana kind of coasts through this game again, I think the Owls find points and backdoor cover here, but Indiana can easily blow the doors off of this one. I'll go with a 42-10 final. Texas Tech, Kent State is making the do not bet list for me. If anything at all, I'd maybe consider the under, because I really don't know if Kent State scores. I touched on them last week saying they absolutely could drop that game to Merrimack, and they nearly did, and I really think Texas Tech should be running the clock almost all of the second half of this game. They won last week 67-7, but Arkansas Pine Bluff is one of the worst teams in the entire FCS. Kent State should be a tougher defense to score on compared to that because I actually don't hate the linebacker unit they have, but it'll still be a cakewalk for Texas Tech, so I'm thinking along the lines of something like 49-3. Virginia improved a lot this offseason. They were one of my favorite week one picks, and they looked even better than I expected. Chandler Morris did go down with an injury, but it sounds like he's completely good to go for this week, and that's great news considering they're on the road at NC State. This is technically a non-conference game due to some scheduling stuff, but both teams are in the ACC, obviously. And I actually have Virginia over NC State in team talent this year. I like CJ Bailey a lot and some of his weapons, but I just don't really trust their defense. I think Virginia has a stronger unit, and I really like what I saw out of that offense last week, too. I think getting them as dogs here is really solid value. The game itself is probably a toss-up, but I'm going to trust in my vision with Virginia this year and take them on the road here with an upset, 30-27. This Pitt Central Michigan line is one I like, honestly. I whiffed on Central's game last week, but I did not expect San Jose State's offense to look as terrible as it did. I just don't think they stand much of a chance in this game against Pitt, who has a really solid front seven, which makes this a pretty rough matchup for what CMU has turned into as a program. They've really adopted a run-heavy offense, throwing just 13 times in week one for about 100 yards. I think Pitt's defense completely dominates this game, and even if they give up some big plays in the run game and Central can score, Pitt showed last week against Duquesne they have some depth and can beat up on bad teams. So give me a 38-10 win in this one for Pitt. Syracuse-UConn was a great game a year ago, and these teams are much closer in talent level this season to me compared to last. Cuse did not look bad at all against Tennessee, but the defense really struggled, and Steve Angeli has some time until he can be as effective as Kyle McCord was a year ago. I see UConn as a team that can flat out compete with the bottom half of the ACC, so although I won't take them here to steal a win on the road, I think it is possible and I have no problem taking them to cover by keeping this game within a score. I think it comes down to the final possessions, but Cuse survives this one by a field goal, 31-28. Liberty is on the road this week at a Jacksonville State team who had very low expectations by many this year, and then hung with UCF until the final seconds last week. But despite that performance, I still think Liberty can win this game by 1 to 2 touchdowns. Gavin Wimsatt has been a rough watch for years and has looked the same last week against UCF, who is arguably the worst team in the entire Power 5 alongside Stanford, and had a completely new roster with the portal. I just think this team had way too much to replace this offseason to really win games like this one. So until they prove to me that they're still that type of program, I trust Ethan Vasco and Liberty a lot more on the road. And I'm going to take them here by 10, 27-17. Texas A&M missed on the cover last week in brutal fashion, with a last-second backdoor bomb from UTSA ruining that spread. They'll have another warm-up game this week with Utah State coming to town. I do like this Utah State team's potential in the Mountain West this year, and I actually don't have them too far off from UTSA, although they are below them for me still. I think A&M is a fantastic team and really well-rounded though, so this game shouldn't be close as that spread suggests. But I see a similar situation where the score is right around that spread late in the game, and I trust Utah State's offense to find points at some points during this game and maybe late against the backups. I'm going to go with a 42-14 final score in this one. Oregon looked absolutely incredible in week one, but that was against FCS Montana State, who I said last week was just not close to the same level of team as they were a year ago to me. Regardless though, a performance that exceptional deserves some praise, and I really think they'll continue that momentum into this week's game against Oklahoma State. It's obviously a much more talented group than last, but they've got quite a few holes and did not look very good against UT Martin. I think the Cowboy defense does a better job making Oregon work though, which may keep the game a bit closer, but the Ducks are going to take this one handily. I'll go 41-17. Clemson had a pretty disappointing week 1, but I was really impressed with the LSU's defense in that game, honestly. If you told me Clemson would hold LSU to 17, I definitely would have assumed they won that game. But now Clemson gets a big chance to snap back and get the offense rolling this year as they host Troy this week. As an offense, Troy loves to run the ball, and I just don't see how they'll have any success with that against Clemson's front. That defense should be hungry and dominant, and they've got some of the best players in the country on that unit, and I just think Klubnik has a field day against this Trojan defense. Antonio Williams probably misses this game, but they've got other guys who can step up, and obviously Wesco and Moore are studs. I think Clemson runs it up a bit in this game and wins this one 48-10. Ole Miss hits the road for an SEC matchup with Kentucky this week, and I don't really understand this line too much. I think part of this has to do with Kentucky looking fairly decent defensively last week, and road games in the SEC always being pretty tough. But from a talent perspective, this is an absurd line, honestly. Kentucky genuinely struggled with Toledo, which was expected because the Rockets are a quality MAC team, but Ole Miss is a legitimate top 25 team on both sides of the ball to me, maybe even higher than that. I don't know how Kentucky scores much in this game. They showed me nothing really in that Toledo game besides Dowdell's huge run. Give me Austin Simmons and the Rebels by multiple scores on the road in this game, 31-13. Kansas, Missouri made the thumbnail this week as the border war is back, and this has a chance to be an incredible game. I thought Missouri would start a little slower last week with a quarterback competition going on, but an unfortunate injury to Sam Horn super early ended that, and Bo Pribula looked really sharp, and they absolutely throttled Central Arkansas. I think that was really important heading into this matchup with a Kansas team who looks pretty solid right now with 2 games under their belt. I think Missouri's defense is strong enough to give Jalen Daniels some fits, but I trust him to compete pretty late into this game, and Kansas is simply a much different team than Central Arkansas. I still see Missouri coming out on top, but by a possession or less. I'm going to go with a 30-24 final score for the Tigers. I thought Rutgers would be able to physically dominate Ohio enough to cover last week's spread of about 2 touchdowns, and early on I actually thought that was happening, but Ohio did not back down and took a huge swing in the second half, tying the game, and Rutgers survived late by a field goal. That made me lose a fair amount of confidence in Rutgers' ability, both in the trenches as well as the secondary, because Ohio was getting absolutely whatever they wanted on offense. Parker Navarro is definitely a stud, but that was too easy. Daquan Finn and Miami, Ohio were shut out last week by Wisconsin, but based on what I saw, I do not see that happening this week. I still trust Finn to get his play together and score this week, and I think it'll be enough to make Rutgers sweat again. So give me Rutgers by just 10, 27-17. I really don't know what to make of this Fresno State-Oregon State game. It's definitely on my do not bet list. Fresno punched a solid Georgia Southern team in the mouth last week, running all over them, a week after having 0 success against Kansas, who of course is just a much better team. I don't know if they'll be able to do that against Oregon State, but it's certainly possible after watching that Cal game. Cal was very impressive to me with so much unknown. JKS lit up the Beavers defense in his debut, and Oregon State looked pretty lifeless on offense, so while I don't love the matchup here for Fresno, I don't think Oregon State is really a better team right now. This game is a complete toss-up for me, so I'll roll with Fresno to keep up that momentum on the road and steal a win from the Beavers, 28-23. Despite dropping that game to Nebraska last week, I like the resilience shown by the Cats, and they nearly pulled off that upset. Brendan Sorsby is a dog with a ton of experience, and now this week against Bowling Green, I think he has a big day statistically. He shouldn't be stopped much at all in this game. Bowling Green has a couple guys I like on their defense, but as a unit, they just do not match up with Cincinnati well at all. And the Bearcat defense should not have a hard time stopping Drew Pine and a MAC offensive line. I'm going to take Cincinnati in blowout fashion here, 41-14. Colorado looked pretty impressive last week against Georgia Tech compared to my expectations, so I still don't think it'll be a great year for them. They showed me they can compete with much of the Big 12 still, which makes this week's game against Delaware a layup, honestly. It sounds like they want to get Julian Lewis involved a bit too, but Caden Salter is their starting quarterback. As for Delaware, I didn't take them to cover last week, and Delaware State hung around a bit and kept it a bit closer as I kind of expected, but I don't really think that was the Delaware playing up to their standards at the same time, and maybe a week together on top of playing against Colorado can bring some of that out. I could definitely see this being a backdoor cover situation late, or just a game they hang around in, but give me Colorado by 3 scores, 38-17. Texas State at UTSA looks like a great matchup between 2 strong group of 5 teams. Texas State throttling Eastern Michigan last week with a ton of offense, and UTSA backdoor covering with 24 points put up on a very good Texas A&M defense. I definitely lean UTSA in this game as of right now, and I'd love a better number around a field goal, but I don't think it comes. I think these 2 squads are very evenly matched, but UTSA has a bit more returning production I trust, and I just don't know much about Brad Jackson yet behind him looking great against a very bad EMU team. and Texas State's defense gave up a bit too many points last week for my liking, knowing what UTSA can do. So I've got the Roadrunners taking a high-scoring game here, 41-35. Navy UAB should bring us a ton of points, especially on the Navy side, honestly, but UAB's got a solid offense themselves that can definitely score in this game as well. But after seeing UAB give up 40 plus to Alabama State last week, I really fear for that defense up against this Navy offense who returned some studs in the backfield, including of course star quarterback Blake Horvath. Navy absolutely demolished VMI last week with 464 rushing yards, and this week should look pretty similar for their offense. I'm going to trust UAB to score a few times, but Navy could flirt with the 50s again. I'll go 48-21 Navy for a final. North Texas at Western Michigan is another game I'm a little confused with the spread on. I feel dumb for fading North Texas last week. I knew they made some changes defensively, but didn't really trust their offense just yet with a brand new quarterback. But Drew Mestemaker put on a show, and I want to mention just again how good the defense looked. North Texas is usually involved in shootouts, but those improvements in the secondary can make this team really scary in the American this year. Western managed to cover against Michigan State last week thanks to a late pick six by the backup and some ugly second half offense out of the Spartans, but that game was looking completely different in the first half. I think we see more of that in this game, and North Texas takes this one by 2 to 3 scores. I'll go 37-20. Wisconsin shut out Miami, Ohio last week with a pretty impressive defensive performance, but unfortunately lost Billy Edwards to injury, and he's been ruled out for week 2 as well. So it'll be Danny O'Neal getting the start after a decent showing in relief last week. Luckily for Wisconsin, they're taking on a Middle Tennessee team who just got blown out by FCS Austin Peay at home. This Middle Tennessee team was picked by some to be a sleeper in the Conference USA this year, but after a game like that, there can't be any confidence in them competing in a game like this. I don't expect much out of Wisconsin, but Miami, Ohio was tougher comp for sure, and they handled that offense. So give me the Badgers big this week, 38-7. West Virginia at Ohio is a coin flip spread this week, a lot in part due to how Ohio played in the second half against Rutgers. They were getting handled in that first half, but found the offensive rhythm and made it a near upset. As for West Virginia, I think they're a similar talent level to Rutgers, with much less experience on the roster, but they shouldn't be surprised by Ohio competing. I think we see more of the same Parker Navarro from last week, but Ohio's defense just doesn't have the guys yet to slow Jaheim White and West Virginia's rushing attack enough. So I think they come away with a road win here and start that second Rich Rod era 2-0, 34-27. Byron Brown put the country on notice last week and was looking like prime Cam Newton trucking Boise State defenders en route to a huge blowout win. I definitely saw South Florida competing and maybe winning that game, but a blowout was pretty shocking to me. This South Florida team looks for real, but now they get a huge test heading to the Swamp to take on a Gators team that I really love this year. This is definitely a trap game for Florida because of Brown's ability to extend drives and put pressure on their defense, but Florida has just so much elite talent, I just can't see them dropping this game, especially knowing what lies ahead for them on their schedule. With that said, I do like South Florida being very competitive in this game, and over 17 points is enough for me to take the Dogs to cover, but Florida by double digits still, 38-24. Arkansas showed out week 1 against a horrendous Alabama A&M team, but man, did Taylon Green put on a show, throwing for 6 touchdowns and accounting for 360 yards. If he takes another step forward this year, I think this Arkansas team has what it takes to knock off a couple suspect SEC teams, but we'll have to see him perform in SEC play to gauge that, and this week is another easy matchup against Arkansas State. But this one should be a little tougher test for the defense. Arkansas State can score. They've got Jalen Raynor, Corey Rucker, and Jaquez Cross in that offense and put up 500 yards last week against Southeast Missouri State. With that said, there is a significant gap between these two teams, and despite liking State's offense, I see the Hogs winning this game by 2 to 3 scores for sure. I'll go 41-20 Arkansas. Missouri State at Marshall is a matchup of two really awful FBS teams. Both landed my bottom 10 preseason and dropped after week 1. Missouri State giving up 73 points to USC was definitely a welcome to the FBS moment, and Marshall got blasted almost exactly how I expected by Georgia. I really don't see either of these teams as clearly better than the other, and definitely wouldn't trust either side by double digits. I can see the spread being a little reactionary to the 73 Missouri State gave up last week, and they tweak a couple things in practice before facing a much less talented Marshall team this week, and we get a closer game. So I'm going to take Marshall by just a score, 31-24. Bill Belichick's North Carolina debut did not go to plan whatsoever, getting eviscerated on national television by a very solid TCU team. But North Carolina just looked flat out awful defensively. A home opener with that much excitement being that ugly and the defense looking that bad was a rough sign of what the season could hold for the Tar Heels. But this week, they're on the road against a team who looked even worse than them against a much lesser opponent. Charlotte was an upset pick over App State last week, and the spread got all the way down to 2.5 before kick, and they got manhandled across the board. I know UNC looked bad, but I really don't see Charlotte competing here either if they play at a similar level. Give me Bill and UNC picking up their first win by a pretty decent margin, 34-17. Kansas State could not have looked any more suspect last week than they did, nearly getting upset by South Dakota in their home building, a week after making mistake after mistake in Ireland. After that, I don't really want to be taking K-State to win any game by 3 scores, but they're just taking on an Army team who just lost to Tarleton State and is flat out not remotely close to the same team from last year. I expected this offense to be bad, but it looks even worse than I thought, and I don't know if they find much success at all against K-State, who hopefully got their wake-up call last week. Army's defense should not be able to stop K-State's weapons, and I just don't see them scoring in response. So give me K-State big, 38-13. Rice really shocked me last week, pulling off the road upset over Louisiana. I didn't see that coming, and more importantly, I think it was indicative of Louisiana taking a pretty big step back this year. But credit to Rice, especially their defense. They look great on the road and now get their home opener against their Big 12 neighbor in Houston, whose defense also looked great in Week 1, even considering the opponent that they played. I don't really expect a shutout with what they lost, but now I definitely can see this being a lower scoring game. However, I feel like Rice won't be able to replicate last week's success for very long, and we see the Houston offense improve a bit, but the score stays low enough for Rice to keep it within 2 scores. So I'll go 30-17 Houston. Western Kentucky at Toledo has a chance to be an incredible game in the group of 5 this week. Maverick McIver is a stud at quarterback for the Hilltoppers, but this is a real test for him after beating up on 2 cupcakes. The Toledo secondary is very, very good, and we saw that last week against Kentucky. I think the Rocket offense should have a much better day against this Western Kentucky defense as well. They just aren't remotely close to the type of athletes Kentucky had defensively, even with them being one of my lower rated teams in that conference. I do think the Hilltoppers offense competes though, and maybe Toledo just doesn't have enough juice offensively to separate on that scoreboard. But I definitely think Toledo should and will win this game. I've got them by a 31-27 final. Memphis might be one of my favorite picks this week. Looking at the matchup, I really think they should dominate this game. Georgia State has no quarterback play and clearly knows it. They went out to get TJ Finley in the portal to come play for them soon because of how bad the QB talent on the roster is. Georgia State does have some high-quality running backs in Rashad Amos and Branson Robinson, but the best offensive player on the team is wide receiver Ted Hurst, and they have to find ways to get him the ball if they want any success. Memphis just needs to focus on limiting the run game and covering Hurst, and the offense led by Nevada transfer Brendan Lewis should be able to have a field day in this game. I'm taking the Tigers by over 3 scores, 41-17. Tulane really impressed me last week, taking easy care of Northwestern, especially defensively, giving up just 3 points on the day. I was pretty high on Tulane as a Group of 5 playoff contender entering the year, but I figured they could start slow with a lot of turnover and expected way more out of Northwestern's offense. That was flat out impressive. Even with them looking so bad, I think Northwestern is at least a tier or 2 better than South Alabama as a team. They just don't have the depth to keep up with a team like Tulane who can go at you for 4 quarters. I think they show up on the road and continue to dominate with a 31-16 win over the Jags. LSU jumped all the way up into the top 3 nationally, and for many, the number 1 team in the nation after last week's performance on the road against Clemson. That defense was incredible, applying pressure onto Klubnik all game long and locking down some incredible receiver talents. Mansour Delaney had a monster game, and I feel really confident in trusting this defense to dominate games, even in the SEC now. This week, they'll turn around for a home opener and face Louisiana Tech, who isn't a terrible Group of 5 team, but definitely a team the Tigers can dismantle. I just don't see any way Louisiana Tech finds points beyond a couple lucky breaks if LSU stays locked in, and Nussmeier should really launch up that Heisman campaign with some gaudy stats here. Give me LSU to win and cover, 48-6. Arizona State beat Northern Arizona a bit more soundly than the score showed last week in my opinion, but the same goes for this week's opponent in Mississippi State. They really dominated that game against Southern Miss despite the score only being a 3-score win. I definitely see some improvements with Mississippi State this year, but with that said, I still like Arizona State's chances in this game. They showed up consistently on the road last year and bring back quite a bit of talent from that roster, and Sam Leavitt is clearly a difference-making quarterback who knows how to get his star playmaker the football and can make things happen with his legs. I think Blake Shapen and company can make some noise in this game, but ultimately Arizona State has way too much firepower on offense to get upset and takes it by 10, 31-21. Finally, we get to the game of the week, a night game between 2 blue bloods of college football, Michigan at Oklahoma. We saw true freshman Bryce Underwood make his debut last week, and honestly, he looked apart in pretty much every way. But this is the week we really see just how ready he is for this stage. I think Michigan will absolutely have to establish a run here to help Bryce get comfortable in a rowdy environment. Oklahoma's defensive line has some mean pass rushers on it, and that can make it really tough on a young quarterback's decision-making under pressure. And on the flip side, although Oklahoma's offensive line did not impress last week and have to play a loaded Michigan group, they were down a couple guys, and John Mateer is going to be very tough to handle for Michigan, especially with Barham out for half of this game after their targeting ejection. But I fully expect Michigan to compete until the end of this game, and I really wouldn't be shocked if Bryce looked great again and helped them win because of how talented he really is. But I can't take a quarterback that young in his second ever start to go on the road and beat a top 20 team in a night game until it's proven to me. I've got Oklahoma by a touchdown here, 27-20. I owe Jackson Arnold a bit of an apology, honestly. I doubted him and his ability all offseason and heading into the Baylor game, but he put on a show and led Auburn to a huge Week 1 win on the road. Maybe a lot of that was due to Baylor's deficiencies, but his legs are a weapon without a doubt, and he's got playmakers all over the field to help him progress as a passer. And this week's game against Ball State should be a routine game for this offense to dominate. Purdue made it look easy, so I think we see the Tigers' passing attack open up even more, and Auburn gets Coleman and Singleton much more involved in this game, blowing out Ball State in the process, 49-3. Vandy at Virginia Tech looks like a great game this week. I thought Vandy looked really sharp against Charleston Southern, which could help them get into rhythm early on in this matchup. And for Virginia Tech, although they kept it close to South Carolina, I thought Kyron Drones looked really underwhelming. South Carolina came out super slow after that first touchdown drive and clearly has some genuine offensive line issues to deal with. Vandy's O-line is honestly a better unit today, and I don't think Virginia Tech's defense has the same early success that we saw completely flip in that second half. Diego Pavia is a dog and can use his legs somewhat similar to Sellers in a way. He should absolutely be able to show up on the road and get the Vandy offense going, and I trust Vandy's defense to force Drones into another rough day passing. So with that combination, I'm leaning towards Vanderbilt as a dog on the road close, 27-24. I talked about it in my Week 1 video, and I'll bring it up again. Akron may have zero pulse all season long, knowing they've got really nothing to play for with a postseason ban due to academics. And that was proven putting up a 0 at home against Wyoming last week. Wyoming's got a decent defense for Mountain West standards, but not nearly on the level of a Nebraska, who also comes into this game with an offense I trust to score basically at will in this game. After a pretty average showing in Week 1 against Cincinnati, I think this is the week that gives Nebraska fans a lot of excitement as they just dust Akron in a blowout, 42-3. USC put on an offensive clinic last week against Missouri State and has another chance to do more of the same this week at home against Georgia Southern, who's definitely a better team than Missouri State, but just got clobbered on the road by Fresno State last week. Looking at that game, I have real concerns for their defense going forward, and I think USC continues to put up gaudy numbers this week. Maybe not another 73, but close to or within the 50s. Georgia Southern's offense definitely has more firepower than Missouri State's, but just not enough to really compete here. Give me USC 48-17. Michigan State lost to Boston College a year ago in heartbreaking fashion on the road and has a chance for revenge this week at home under the lights Saturday night. And looking at these two teams, I thought BC really impressed last week against Fordham, but that's a completely different level of football team than the Spartans. And despite not covering, Michigan State looked really solid in the first half against Western Michigan. The second half was a different story, which has been a recurring theme for MSU lately. If they want to take this game, they'll have to snap out of that second half funk, but I do trust their playmakers to make that happen. I just think they've got enough talent offensively to survive late and have that home field advantage on their side. So give me Childs and the Spartans to win this one close, 24-20. Alabama ULM is definitely falling in the no bet category for me. Alabama could absolutely come out pissed and light up the scoreboard in this game, but I don't think ULM is a true bottom of the barrel team in the group of five. They're well coached typically and have a decent defense within the Sun Belt. Bama has some issues they really need to work out on both sides of the ball. They could not stop Florida State's rushing attack, and the offense was not finding anything consistently working. I think the Tide controlled this game from start to finish, but I'm not sure it's going to be by 40 plus with all they've got to fix, especially if ULM can score once or twice in this game. I'm going to take Bama big, but just not to cover, 41-7. My worries for Nico Iamaleava this season were completely validated in Week 1 as they've got absolutely manhandled by a strong Utah team, and Nico did not look nearly as comfortable as he did a season ago at Tennessee. He just doesn't have the talent around him to really make life easy for him as a leader of the offense, and the UCLA defense looks like Swiss cheese right now to make it even worse. As for UNLV, they looked so much better in Week 2. Anthony Calandria played the whole game at quarterback, and the defense was much more in control of that game. Whatever they did in prep really made a difference, and I think it could be continuing on to this matchup. UCLA has some serious issues, so I'll probably be in the more talented team. It's closer than you would think, and UNLV is at home with a lot of offensive firepower, especially in Jet Thomas. As a coin flip game for me, I don't mind taking the underdog at home. Give me UNLV by 3, 31-28. Tulsa at New Mexico State is a contender for ugliest watch of the week, honestly, but I definitely favor a side in this game. Tulsa is not good by any means, but they're better than New Mexico State to me. 19-3 against Bryant is nasty work out of New Mexico State last week. It was honestly what I expected, which is why I took Bryant to cover, but man, did that offense look rough. Tulsa took care of Abilene Christian without a sweat, and Kirk Francis looked pretty solid in the process, as did the running back duo of Dominic Richardson and A.J. Allen. I just don't see Mexico State having an answer for Tulsa's offense if they get going again. So give me Tulsa 28-20. Ziva Ekhoff not starting at quarterback for Washington State was a bit of a surprise to me, and I was not impressed at all by Jackson Potter and the Cougar offense. They looked flat out awful last week and could have lost to a new-look Idaho team that I am not very high on. San Diego State, on the other hand, was very impressive last week with a 42-0 win over Stony Brook. The Cougars are obviously in a better spot than Stony Brook, but it's hard not to see how those games went and feel like the Aztecs have a shot here on the road. I mean, I thought this could be a good game prior to those performances. I just don't see anything trustworthy with this Cougars offense now, and San Diego State's defense is genuinely solid. I think this is a really low-scoring game again, and I'm going to trust San Diego State to show up on the road. I'll go 23-20 for a final. BYU absolutely throttled Portland State last week, and despite Portland State being a horrific football team, that final score was really impressive, and I think BYU has some ballers on that defense. Bear Bachmeier looked comfortable in his first collegiate start as well, and this week they'll host a Stanford team whose offense looks completely anemic. Ben Gulbranson could not get anything going against Hawaii, and the BYU defense is just a different level, as is that home field advantage in Provo. I think the Cougs completely dominate again this week. Not nearly the same offensive output, but a defensive clinic that ends in the BYU cover, 38-13. Hawaii looked like a much different team in Week 1's loss to Arizona, and it continued that trend of Hawaii looking like a completely different team at home historically. Luckily for them, they are at home this week taking on a Sam Houston team that just got throttled by UNLV in their own building. I was low on Sam Houston entering the year, and Week 0 kind of gave me some encouragement, but that's out of the window now, honestly. I just think Hawaii is a better team, especially offensively, than Sam Houston. I trust Micah Alejado to bounce back in this game. Pofele Ashlock and Nick Senecal should be able to get the ball more often and in more space than against Arizona. So I'll take Hawaii to cover a spread under a touchdown now, 30-20. That's it for my Week 2 picks. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on any of these games, as well as any ideas you have for content on the channel in the future. As always, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
BARK Radio.